Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights intertwined through personal stories as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. For more great Torah learning through Torch, the Torah Outreach Center of Houston, go to torchweb.org. Now to the show.
Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema Podcast. Last episode we did the spiritual framework of all of creation. It was something requested to me by my fellow members of the Shema Podcast WhatsApp community. And as part of that conversation, a lot of the listeners were wanting to learn about other forms of rectification. Primarily, a lot of the questions stem from, do souls get reincarnated into lower life forms? So I want to address all this in aggregate, and I've done a lot of research on this topic, but I want to begin by saying the following. Some of this stuff is a bit scary, but what I think the key takeaway is that we should all have, when you really look into it, is the absolute compassion and precision on how Hashem runs his creation. He gives the Jew plan A, path towards rectifying their soul and earning their Olam HaBa through the study of Torah and mitzvos. However, of course, if a soul does not complete their task and rectify the soul, which is forging it again into an entity that can exist in Olam HaBa, then he has a plan B, a way of helping us fix what we were not able to fix more proactively in this world. We, of course, want to choose plan A. We want to study Torah, do mitzvos. For one, we're able to do that using our own free will versus having our neshama thrust into all this type of chaotic situations that can ensue when the neshama leaves the body. Now, a lot of what you're going to be hearing is things that happen when the neshama or when we fail to do certain mitzvos. And I want to be very clear and sensitive to those who are still on their journey. We're all still on a journey. But for many, the fulfilling the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos is still not something they have done, or keeping kosher, not yet. Is what I always tell people to say, not yet, but pray to Hashem to move them in that direction. I think I'm equipped to discuss this with some sensitivity since I've been in, I think, every position that one can be in, which seems quite daunting, especially in the area of someone who, like myself, who was learned about the truth of Hashem, his world, his Torah, and found myself married to a non-Jew. And therefore having a daughter who was not Jewish. Lots of complications, lots of challenges. I did not know how to get from point A to B, and I know many of you are in that same predicament with all these things. I don't live in a community. How am I going to keep Shabbos? It can be done, but yes, as someone who's done it in a non-Jewish community, it's very challenging. I had a wife and daughter who were not at first open to the idea at all of moving to a community, a prerequisite for going through a conversion. It's certainly not something I wanted to force upon my daughter, and I never did. One of the greatest ways we can become close to Hashem is when we are in a place where we have no idea how we are going to fulfill Hashem's will. And we then tell Hashem, I want to do this, I just don't know how. Only you can help me. Because in that moment, what you are doing is you are acknowledging reality, that you are a creation that is dependent on your creator. And you're acknowledging that you can't do this by yourself. That is that level of self-nullification, or bittul, is the springboard to achieving great things. And Hashem does always continually move us into a place where we have to reach out to him and say, I have no idea how to solve this, only you can. But again, that is the greatest place to be. So Do not become discouraged by anything I will be disclosing on this episode. In all of these sources, the one thing that is repeated over and over again is the power of teshuvah, of recognizing that what you are doing is wrong, you want to fix it, and you want to come closer to Hashem. In Pirkei Avos, there is a line I have repeated before, but I'm going to say it again. According to the effort is the reward. And in the Gemara, Barachos 34b, it says, in the place where Bala Teshuvah stand, even the completely righteous cannot stand. And that is what is important in Hashem's eyes, is that we are constantly pushing ourselves to be better. And a lot of people who are Bala Teshuvah think that life is easier if you're born as a frum Jew. They already know from their lifetime of experiences growing up how to keep Shabbos, kashrus, all these mitzvos. But I can assure you their challenges are there as well. And they're not easier because it's all about the effort we are putting in any moment. You know, when I first came to the community is when I fully started keeping kosher. We had several years when we were living in the suburbs, we had kosher our kitchen. My wife was making trips all the way to this side of town, 45 minutes one way with no traffic to get kosher food and bring it back to the house. However, there was times when my wife and my daughter just said, we want to go out to eat and there's no kosher restaurant. So our rule was we go to a non-kosher restaurant that was nearby and we would eat fish and vegetables. But it still wasn't kosher. It wasn't until we were able to move here and I had an infrastructure around me that we were able to fully adapt a kosher diet. And that first Yom Kippur, that made a big impact in the heavens. I was now fully keeping kosher. But the following year, it didn't go on my resume. I couldn't say I kept kosher again this year. It's like that was done. I heard a shir where Rabbi Gruninsky gave a lot more clarity to me on the Yetzer Tov. I never understood that. We have Yetzer Ra, an evil inclination, a Yetzer Tov, which is a good inclination. And I was having trouble drawing distinction between the Yetzer Tov and the Neshama, our true essence, who just wants to do good. And the way he explained it through this teaching was that the Yetzer Tov is almost like establishing new beachhead in a battle. You know, so go back to the keeping kosher. I started off by saying from the very beginning, as soon as I started learning, knowing only what I knew at that point in time was no more shellfish, no more pork. That was an establishment of some beachhead. My Yetzer Tov had planted the flag and I never went back to eating shellfish and pork. And I continued to add to it step by step until I fully got there. Each step was me planting the flag of the Yetzer Tov in front of me. So when you think about someone like the Rabbi Wolbe's, they have, they're not commended by not eating treif or violating the kosher diet. What Hashem is pushing them to do is continue to grow in much more deeper levels of their learning, their refinement of their midos. They're just evaluated on a much higher level. But he knows we each come in this world at different stages, different situations. And what he wants to see is how much we push forward, how much we forge ahead. That is what I want to convey at the beginning of all this. He is aware of that. He is aware of all of our situations. And I will add too that everything is part of a divine plan. Now, one of the things I wanted to discuss before I get into all the different rectifications of the soul post-life is that you often hear, I've always heard these near-death experiences where someone says, they died and it was just this blissful, beautiful experience. You can hear this and sort of think like, okay, they weren't keeping Shabbos. They weren't doing all these things. Well, for one, most of the stories are told by people that were not Jewish. Due to the promise of Abraham, the Jewish people were promised all a portion of Olam HaBa. So in order to get them into Olam HaBa, if they do not fulfill mitzvos, these other forms of rectification will take place. Now, there are some areas where a Jew will lose their portion in Olam HaBa. The Gemara on Sanhedrin says there are some severe transgressions that will cause someone to lose their portion in Olam HaBa, and they are the following. One is just an absolute denial of the resurrection of the dead. You don't believe in Olam HaBa? Okay, you will not have Olam HaBa. It's that simple. Two is an absolute denial of the divine origin of Torah, which is something that we see, sadly, in Kalei Yisrael. I will tell you that I did research and look into that there is a difference between a Jew who is listening to someone who calls themselves a rabbi, places themselves into a situation of authority, and tell Jews that the Torah is not divine. I have heard this from rabbis, as I said, many times on this podcast, many times. And the Torah does not speak kindly about them at all. It also says that Hashem does not aid them in teshuvah because for Hashem to have mercy on them and it calls them to do teshuvah when they've done so much damage, again, would not be fair. And everything Hashem is doing is totally fair and precise. So the Jew who is misled by someone presenting themselves as a rabbi, an authority figure, the sins that Jew does falls on the rabbi that's misleading them. The other thing is denial of Hashem's existence, which includes even believing there is a God, but believing he does not control everything happening in nature and all there is Hashem. So something we've discussed in previous podcasts is someone can say, I believe in God, but they'll often define the God they believe in as the God that Pharaoh believed in, that he created the world and left it alone and is independent of his creation. So this also means that a Jew needs to understand definitionally who God is. And if they deny the definition of God as the Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, that he is controlling everything, to deny that existence of God by that definition will also cause a Jew to lose their portion in Olam HaBa. And when Hashem sees that no matter what move he makes, that Jew will not take the necessary actions of teshuvah to earn Olam HaBa, then they receive all their benefits in this world. This is actually a verse directly from the written Torah in Devarim. And it says, and he repays those who hate him to their face, to destroy them. He will not delay for the one who hates him. He will repay him to his face, meaning a Jew who is not taking any effort to learn the truth and ask questions and try to understand and try to come close to Hashem and reach out to him. He pays them out in this world. He would desire to pay them with the ultimate, Olam HaBa, but if they're not taking the necessary action to forge themselves into an entity that can live in Olam HaBa, then he has no other choice but to give them as much pleasure as he can in this world. So he'll give them wealth and good health, and life will go easy and look good. And the Satan loves that because you can have a Torah observant Jew who is struggling with the challenges Hashem is putting before them in order to help them continue to grow closer. And they'll look over at the totally non-observant Jew who's the billionaire who has all these physical material blessings, or so they seem. And they'll say, hey, he's not keeping mitzvos. He seems to have a good life. I'll just live like him. And they are. So they also serve the purpose of being a test to us. So if you want to know what it looks like for a Jew who is in the game, who is striving every day to come closer to Hashem, then there's always something they're going to be toiling with and struggling with, whether it's a page of Gemara or a health problem, a relationship problem, a financial problem, something Hashem is going to be putting in front of them in order to help them come closer to him. So This is what I wanted to get to, because a lot of people hear these near-death experiences as a Jew and think seems pretty good. Everything seems to go well when someone dies. Just beautiful bliss. Here's something I wanted to share some ideas from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah 20b. And it describes how the angel of death, and again, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, and the angel of death are the same spiritual entity, just with 3 different titles for 3 different roles it plays in Hashem's creation. But it discusses how the angel of death will lure a soul out of its body by creating an illusion of bliss in the next world. And then drawn out by this false sense of security, the soul will leave its earthly body and form. And once that is done, once the soul has been fully pulled out, the body has been separated. For someone that did a lot of things we'll be discussing, once they leave the body fully, then a lot of these things take place at that point in time. So before we get into the various forms of reincarnation, let's discuss the other forms of purification that the soul can go through to repair its blemishes. One of them is Gehenna. What you will hear is that as painful as Gehenna seems to be, and it does get whitewashed a bit as being like a power wash, which is not the case. It is not a pleasant experience. But there's many Jewish souls who are working towards the opportunity to get to Gehenna, as you will see. But one of the things that in the Gemara Eruvin 19a, it says that Avraham Avinu stands at the entrance to Gehenna, and he pulls any Jew out who has kept their bris milah and kept Shabbos. And let's delve into what these 2 things mean. And again, we spoke a lot about the bris in the last episode. Obviously, Avraham is not looking to see whether or not we had our member circumcised when we were 8 days old. He's looking at whether we kept our spiritual bris milah, our spiritual purity. And the other is, as I mentioned, Shabbos observance. So what are both these things? Both of these are a covenant. The first with Shabbos is when a Jew keeps Shabbos and he avoids any of the 39 creative acts. What is a Jew doing? A Jew is saying and making a declaration that I am not a creator. I am a creation of a creator. And that is why I am not doing any act of creation on Shabbos. You are making a stand, and through your actions, you are acknowledging Hashem's existence, and that He is the only one that's creating anything. And then when you keep your bris milah, you are saying, I am not a body. I am a neshama in a body. So you're making another declaration of who you really are. So both those mitzvos are very powerful. And that is why that the tradition is that we, after someone dies, we say Kaddish for them. Because we assume that most Jews, all of us, are not perfect, and we have to go through some stage of Gehenna, whether it's a day, a month. But the longest we say it for a Jew is 11 months, because to say it for 12 months would be to assume that they were a wicked person, which is not the case. However, if someone did not observe Shabbos, their children should say Kaddish for them for the full 12 months. Regarding these 2 mitzvos too, of the sexual purity and Shabbos, when you read the Torah, you'll see that there are certain mitzvos where it says if a Jew transgresses them, the punishment is caress, which means spiritual excision. And it's a form of spiritual separation, or what's called cutting off of the soul from its higher source, and potentially from the Jewish people. Now, of course, anytime who does this can do teshuvah and be reunited. But from my best of understanding from everything I've read, what this means is that a Jew loses that divine connection and protection from the Almighty when they don't keep the eternal covenant of Shabbos and bris milah. Now, again, I want to go back to the beginning. For Baal Teshuvah, who is working towards this, Hashem is guiding them and aware of that. He is looking at the trajectory that you're on, and since time is only something that exists in the physical world, and Hashem is outside of time, as He created time, He knows the trajectory you're on. So don't freak out if you're not keeping Shabbos at this point in time, but do know how important it is and to work towards that. Now, there's also another type of purification prior to someone getting the opportunity to go to Gehenna, called Kaf Hakela. The translation is the slingshot. This one really concerns me because I have a brother-in-law who has these thrill rides that he owns and runs, and he brought this one to the Texas Rodeo Fair, and I went and met him and got on this ride he had called the slingshot. And it was just like it describes it. You get in this little round cage and it slings you up in the air like a slingshot. And I thought it was horrifying. I found nothing pleasurable about it at all. Totally unsettling. And I was experiencing this after I had learned about this kafakela, the slingshot. And I just knew I didn't want anything part to do with it, because basically what it is the soul is slung between different realms and unable to find rest. It's typically a consequence for sins involving misuse of speech, like lashon hara, slander, any actions that deeply violate personal integrity or others' dignity. The soul has to go through this in order to purify it. But it's an intense sense of dislocation and unrest, moving between these realms without a permanent place. But the dislocation gives the soul insight in the pain it may have caused others. So when someone passes and we say prayers on their behalf, say Kaddish, do acts of kindness on their behalf, these are one of the things that can do to release a neshama from such a situation. The other one is called Chabut HaKever, translating as shaking in the grave. And it's a process the soul goes through where it is forcibly detached from its earthly attachment to its body, so it can be prepared to enter the next stage in the spiritual world. It's there to cleanse the soul's attachment to its physical pleasures and materialism, and is refining it so any residual body desires or indulgences that it clung to in life, that can remove those. Again, part of the cleansing process, something we definitely want to avoid. Now, the soul can be reincarnated into lower life forms. And this gets into, as I alluded to in the last podcast, how when we say a bracha over food, it's so important. Because not only are we elevating and releasing that divine energy from the food that will nourish us and give us energy to perform a mitzvah and to reveal Hashem in the world through that mitzvah, but we are also providing opportunity for souls that have been reincarnated into lower life forms to become rectified. So a lot of the sources from this podcast come from the Arizal's book, The Gate of Reincarnation. And he gives some examples of various sins and why they get reincarnated into these other various forms. So for example, if a soul exhibited cruelty or violence towards others, he or she will be reincarnated as an animal to experience life from a more dependent, less autonomous perspective. Because in this state, the soul undergoes the humility and vulnerability, giving it a chance to experience what it inflicted upon others. The Arizal goes on to explain that they'll be reincarnated into a non-predatory animal, living in a world where it has to rely on others for survival. So this state allows the soul to feel the dependency and vulnerability it may have neglected of others in their human life. If someone uses their speech improperly to engage in lashon hara, considering speech is considered a unique human gift and a primary tool for spiritual connection, will lead to a soul being reincarnated into an animal or even a plant where speech is just not even possible. So for a soul to be reincarnated as a plant, experiencing a quiet and silent existence, it allows the soul to reflect on its misuse of words in human life. And when you listen to this, you may even think, oh, I'll be reincarnated as a beautiful flower. How tranquil. You have to understand that our neshama cannot stand being in a human body. It did not want to come here, and when it leaves, when we're sleeping at night, it wants to go back. The physicality is just grotesque to the neshama. Now, when we elevate our lower extremities and our lower souls and our nephesh soul, then it can become a great place for the neshama. There's a whole midrash that talks about how when the angel of death came to extract Moshe Rabbeinu from his body, the neshama did not want to leave. It was so pure and beautiful. It's like, this is what can get better than this. And Hashem had to come and take Moshe's soul from his body against its will because the angel of death had no power to do it. So this is the goal, is to purify our entire body so our neshama has such influence over it that a divine recognition of Hashem at all levels of our soul, from our ruach down to our nephesh, is materialized. But back to my point I was trying to make is that if you think now that it'd be super cool to come back as a beautiful flower, think again. You're wrong. It's not pleasant. It's miserable for the neshama. Let's focus on avoiding all these type of outcomes. If a person was overly attached to physical pleasures or materialism, they may reincarnate into inanimate objects or life forms that has minimal access to material enjoyment. The type of this reincarnation is meant to purify the soul from materialistic tendencies by placing it in a situation where physical indulgence is impossible, teaching detachment and humility. So this is where someone who was constantly chasing after physical pleasures and materialism are reincarnated as a rock or a mineral. And this allows the soul to focus on spiritual purification. Another is if a soul fails to do a certain mitzvah, like waving the lulav, then the soul is reincarnated into the plants used in a lulav. So you can either fulfill the mitzvah of waving the lulav, or you can come back and be the lulav that another Jew will fulfill the mitzvah of waving. Or they may reincarnate into an animal that has kosher meat if they avoided eating kosher meat. There's all types of ways to fulfill the mitzvah of keeping kosher. You can be the one eating the kosher meat and saying a bracha over it, or you can become the kosher meat that hopefully a Jew is saying a bracha over so it can rectify you. This is horrifying and not even really funny, but you can see the precision in which Hashem operates the world. And another idea by the Arizal is that if someone does not live a life of service to others, which is our purpose, to serve Hashem and we serve others, if they fail to do that, they are reincarnated as a bee. Because what is a bee's life? It's like totally submissive to the collective. It works nonstop for the collective. So you can also see how all of Hashem's creation, plants, all the different types of animals and insects, not only are they here to serve us when we're alive, but they also can serve a way of rectification for the soul by coming back into those entities. And then, of course, there is the reincarnation or gagul, where souls return back into a new body to take care of unfinished business. From what I understand, most of us have lived multiple lives. This is not our first rodeo, especially in this current era. You know, the Jews that perished during the Holocaust, I have heard through shares too that many of us are reincarnations of those Jews that lived through that. So everything is being orchestrated, my friends, in the end to rectify our soul with tremendous precision and compassion. In the end, Hashem is just wanting us to exist in Olam HaBa with him. Now, Olam HaBa is not the same for everyone. Obviously, someone who lives a life in Torah mitzvos, their Olam HaBa is going to look a lot nicer than someone who has to go through one of these soul corrections and reincarnations through lower life forms, as those were sort of, again, thrust upon him. It wasn't done through free will. However, the one thing I've read about Olam HaBa is that no one is jealous of the other. Because what can take away from the pleasure of Olam HaBa is if, for one, we get something that we haven't earned, or two, we don't get as much as we have earned. So it's always in exact precision. So we are going to find our Olam HaBa perfect because it's exactly what we earned. So I think the practical wisdom on what was discussed today is knowing the precision of how Hashem runs the world, as I said. Two, taking this life seriously, learning Torah constantly to improve ourselves, fulfill the mitzvos if we're not fulfilling them, praying to Hashem to help us fulfill them, to know that Hashem loves us, and that, unless we are totally denying his existence and denying the divinity of Torah and desecrating his name by saying things that are not true like that to other people, he wants us. And he's going to guide us with love and compassion to this ultimate end of our life and the whole purpose and reason we were created. It also reinforces the importance of learning our brachos when we eat food and fulfilling the mitzvot like lulav and all these things, because we're also there supporting our brothers and sisters who maybe did not get to fulfill these things and rectifying them. So whenever we say a bracha over a certain mitzvah and we fulfill the mitzvah with joy, we don't know. We could be rectifying and releasing these neshamas from a very challenging situation. So I hope I did this justice in less than an hour. I wanted to do some broad strokes, cover this as best I could. The research I pulled, I think I pulled together like 50 pages. I mean, I barely sort of scratched the surface with it, but I just didn't think all these details were necessary, nor would I keep you engaged the entire time. But I hope I covered enough of the content to give you an understanding of the complexity of Hashem's world and our very important role within it. Thank you for listening, and please remember to rate the podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting Torch so they can continue to spread Torah wisdom to the world by making a donation at torchweb.org and clicking donate in the top right corner of the page.